good day, folks. Welcome back to another episode of Pirkei Avos with Rabbi Chaim Coffman. I so appreciate him all the way from Israel sharing with us the ethics of the fathers. And last week we were in Mishnah, chapter 1, Mishnah 6, and he talked deeply about acquiring for ourselves a rabbi, which we definitely need to do. And he talked about the ins and outs of that. And I know that today he's going to continue with this with acquiring for yourself a friend and how to judge everybody favorably. And he knows exactly what he's talking about. So I'm not going to go on and on and on because he's the learned rabbi. So without any further ado, Rabbi Coffman, how are you today? So good to have you with us. And we're thank you for all the good stuff you're sharing with us.
It's a pleasure to be here. As always, that is for sure. Get into, a little bit of ethics, a little bit of learning, a little bit of excitement. You got to keep the Energizer Bunny going, right? This is, the bottom line is you got to love what you do. And even if it's hard, I spoke in my Q&A today all about that, about reaching potential. And, we get beaten down in life, but you know what? Doesn't matter because God says this is what you got to do, right? Whether you're a Jew, whether you're a non-Jew, you got to put the pedal to the metal and you got to take from the mind, put it in the heart. I speak about that a lot, but, to be the real deal, that's what you got to do. So we're in the 6th Mishnah. We'll see how far we go with this. It says Yeshua ben Prachia. Again, in Nitai of Arbel. Again, remember, it's in pairs, right? They're getting it in pairs from their previous rabbis before. They received the tradition from Yeshua, from them. It says Yeshua ben Prachia. He says, accept the teacher upon yourself, acquire a friend for yourself, and judge everyone favorably. So we spoke about the importance of having a teacher, right? That goes without saying, even though there may be people think, God's going to speak to them and, they'll take care of their own and they know better and, everything else. It's called pride, right? That's called ego to say, I know better, the rabbi's this and the rabbi's that and whatever, right? So you need someone to teach you, right? Somebody I deal with, on a regular basis, a Jew, right? He has trouble learning, right? He wants to learn Talmud. Talmud's hard, right? Talmud is definitely very hard to learn. So I keep telling him, he gets frustrated. I said, you need a teacher. You can't learn it on your own. Doesn't matter if it's in the language you speak. You need someone to teach you the grammar. You need someone to teach you what the questions are, what's going on, what's the background, right? You can't learn this stuff on your own, right? It's impossible, right? That's why I have the Christians. You have other groups. They make mistakes. Right? They make plenty of mistakes. They misinterpret. They reinterpret. Right? So I understand you have to have someone, who's a teacher for yourself. Now, that doesn't mean that, you could be the same age. Right? They could have, similar knowledge. That doesn't mean they have to have so much knowledge exponentially. But someone you can grow with, someone who knows the subject better. Right? That doesn't, even if they're younger than you. Right? That doesn't really matter. But now we get to acquire a friend for yourself and judge everyone favorably. Now, there's an obvious question, right? It's an obvious question. You can't learn ethics of our fathers. You can't learn anything like you read in a newspaper. You got to think. You got to think what it means, right? So I would have thought, again, this is just me, why didn't it say acquire a teacher? Right? It should have said acquire a teacher, not necessarily acquire a friend. Right? A person's going to have friends where I have to pay. I mean, okay, so if you're a nerd or whatever, you want to have some acquaintances. I guess, you might want to pay for that. But most people are not going to pay to acquire a friend. Right? They're not going to pay for friendship. So this can mean even if a person needs to pay someone else, it's still worthwhile. In other words, you want companionship. You want companionship. You want someone to throw ideas off of, but I don't know, you're shy, let's say, or you're an introvert. I mean, similar thing, whatever the case is. But if you really want to get someone to help you, then it may be worthwhile to pay. Now, obviously, it's not an obligation.
Dang, I lost my your vocal feed, Rabbi, for a second there, and I don't know why. Let me just switch you back. I'm positive you should be back now. Oh, microphone. Forgive me, folks. I don't know what's going on with this new computer. I bought this new computer last year, and it seems to be not liking a conflict. There seems to be a conflict between my speakers and my soundboard. So it's not Rabbi Coffman's end; it's on my end. So hang on one second, folks. It's not recognizing my speakers. So hang on. I've got to unplug it and plug it right back in. And I don't know why it's doing this. Yeah. Okay, that should have changed it back. Not recognizing my speakers. Rabbi, can you speak for a second? Nope, I totally lost you. Hang on, I'll figure this out. This should not be doing this. And yeah, I got to just shut this down.
Check 1, check 2, check 3, check 4, check 5, check 8, check 10, check 20. Checkmate. Check 1, check 2, check check 1, check 2, check 3, check 4. Okay. Uh, can we hear you? You can hear me? We're good? Okay. All right, so I guess let's continue then. So the question was about a person who would need to pay for someone else, right? And the obvious question is it's worthwhile, right? It'll be worthwhile to acquire a friend even if you have to pay them. Now, there could be any number of reasons why a person may have to pay, or why they may want to pay, right? But in the end, for them it's worthwhile. We're going to see what it means, what the benefits of having a friend is in general, right? I mean, there should be obvious benefits, but I think we're going to see it in a little bit, at least from a Torah perspective, in a little bit different light, of what it is. Now, we mentioned before that when it says acquire a friend, it does not mean, why did we not say acquire a rabbi? Shouldn't you have to pay a rabbi? Rabbi's a teacher, right? Why should we not have to acquire? Why seemingly you shouldn't have to pay for him, right? So the commentaries say They should be teaching for free. Now, that's going to be a little bit controversial. Why? Because you see that, if a rabbi is the rabbi of a synagogue, he gets paid, right? He gets paid a salary.
Right, right.
If he teaches in the school, right? If he teaches classes, he should get paid. Now, it could be way back when either they were supported in other ways, just like the Kohanim, right? The Kohanim served in the temple. They didn't have any other jobs. They taught the people. They did the sacrifices, but they got benefit from the sacrifices from some of them, right? They got some of the meats. They got coats, right? They got other parts, right? Some other parts of the animal they didn't get or whatever, but they were taken care of. Now, the Talmud says that really it should be forbidden. It should be forbidden for a rabbi to take money. Now, if someone's teaching a class, if someone's teaching a class to little kids, what is he being paid for? Basically, he's not being paid for his oratory skills, right? If he's teaching 6, 7, 8-year-olds or whatever, he's not being paid for that, right? The Talmud says, but he's not allowed to get paid. So how is he allowed to teach children? So the answer is classroom control. That's what he's getting paid for, right? He's getting paid so they don't kill each other. That's probably a good thing, that they don't run around and all that. I mean, even though that happens also, right? So according to that, they can get paid for that because classroom control. Now the question is how far you take that. Are they going to be allowed? Let's say they teach, 8th grade, they teach 10th grade, teach 12th grade. Well, kids are not that easy to control, in different ways. They could run the class unless you're very strict disciplinarian, right? So I would even say, let's take it that far. Even if they teach high school, right? They should be able to be paid. Classroom control. Today, it's interesting. People have no attention span, right? And, in the ultra-Orthodox community, it's different because they're trained from a very young age. But imagine going into a secular school, right? And you have to dress up like a game show host. It's like, okay, I got my bow tie. For 200 points, how are you going to pass the course, right? You have to entertain them. Because if you don't entertain them, you lose them, right? So now we're going to make a little bit of a jump. So a rabbi, someone teaching a class, classroom control, we can understand they're not being paid for their knowledge, per se, right? They're not being paid for their oratory skills, depending what age or whatever. Classroom control. Now, what if it's not classroom control? What if someone needs to be tutored? Let's say person has difficulty. Child has difficulty learning. Chumash, right? The 5 books of Moses, commentaries, Talmud, and they want to hire somebody. The parents, the kids behind, kids having difficulty. They want to hire someone to tutor him. If it's in mathematics and science and English and anything else, right? And the tutor's going to take $30 an hour, $40 an hour. No one's going to complain, right? That's the going rate. Now, someone comes and gives of their knowledge and gives of their skill, right? Normally, if it's for a kid, or even if it's for a young adult, doesn't matter. Would they be willing to pay to brush up on their skills? Of course they'd be willing to pay. What's the issue? You are helping them get over the hump. You are getting them to be able to learn a text on their own, right? You're helping them get the information, right? There's no issue with that. What if somebody, now again, any class, forget Torah, any class online, you're not going to haggle with them. Whatever they charge, that's it. Unless they give you a bird special or whatever, whatever the case is, you're going to do that. You're not going to argue any educational course because you're getting value. You're getting a service, right? You're getting information, right? And hopefully the information is good. Now the problem is people say, look, you shouldn't, if you're going to teach, Especially if you're going to teach Noahides or converts, they should be taught for free. Why in the world do you have the ability to charge? I had one person tell me it was extortion. They couldn't afford the class. It wasn't so expensive, right? But they said it's extortion. This is only one person that ever happened to me in 10 years. 11 years say it was extortion. So they said you should be ashamed of yourself and this and that. They said, what would your rabbi tell you? You have a rabbi you listen to? I said, yeah, one of the Torah giants of the generation. What would he tell you? I said, you know what he would tell me? I don't charge enough. That's what he would say. He said, what are you giving away? He said, what are you giving away so much for free? Okay, I digress. But the point is that people will say, why do you have a right to charge? Right? You should have no right to charge. Did Moshe Rabbeinu teach for free? Of course he taught for free. God made him rich. He made him rich with the tablets. He didn't need money. Right? So today, if someone's going to teach, in all yeshivas and all schools, they're all behind. Right? They're not rolling in the dough. Even as much as they charge for tuition. Right? People making minimal salaries. But they're doing it because they love what they do. Right, but they deserve to be paid, right? If you tell me it's classroom control, okay, so they'll be paid for that. But why shouldn't they be paid like a doctor or a lawyer? In theory, they're doing 10 times more for the sake of the Jewish people and for the sake of the world, because we believe learning Torah upholds the world. So if it upholds the world, you want people who are teaching them to teach them right and to inspire them. Right? Energize their body. Right? Inspire them, give them what they need to reach their potential. Right? That's what the Ramchal and Derech Hashem and the way of God says at the beginning. Right? What a person's purpose in this world. Right? You're in this world to struggle, to strive. But there's an antidote. There's an evil inclination in this Torah. The Torah is the antidote. The evil inclination runs wild, makes life difficult, but you still have to serve God. Doesn't matter how hard it is. Doesn't matter how many times we get knocked out. Right? That's why you need to learn Jewish philosophy. You need to learn from someone who can pick you up when you're down. Right? I'm not talking about a psychologist. Right? You don't necessarily need a psychologist. You need inspiration. People need to live inspired, and in this world, it's very hard. Right. The reason it's very hard is very simple, because we get beaten down in life, and there's a disconnect from the brain to the heart. I speak about it a lot. The brain can tell you, I know exactly what to do. I know why to do it. You don't have to tell me. And my heart says, football. My heart says, movies. My heart says, all these things. CFL, right? All these things. And all the fun. So you have that clash. Right? You always have that clash. Right? But the point, let's not get lost in the point. If someone needs to get from A to B, right? From point A to B. Now, anyone knows that they're a Noahide or they're in the process of conversion. I guarantee you, and I can promise you this, you are not going to get from A to B without someone holding your hand. Without someone teaching you, because you're in the outside looking in. You can, Google all kinds of things. You can learn things online. You can go through books. It's not the same. It's not the same if you have someone who's got all this knowledge and years of experience who's giving that over, because that's worth something. If someone, let's say someone's a marketing expert, right? They do digital marketing, Facebook ads, email series, webinars, right? They write up webinars so you can get traffic and you can get ways to sell your product, whatever it is. Don't you think those people learned? Don't you think they took courses? They spent time. They spent hours. And, they can charge a lot. You're paying a lawyer. You pay, like you said, you paid a ton of money to a lawyer. What are you paying all the money for? For all that knowledge that they have in all the years. Doctor, no different. Right? Well, you're in Canada, it's subsidized. Better. We're in Israel, it's subsidized. It's better. Right? But in general, you go to a doctor privately, it's going to cost you a mint. Right? Doesn't matter how far moved away they are from their degree. Doesn't matter. They review, they don't review, they can look things up, whatever it is. You're paying for that knowledge. You might say, okay, I'm overpaying. That might be an issue. Now, when it comes to Torah, Shulchan Aruch and the Code of Jewish Law says, you're allowed to charge. Right? Rav Yosef Karo. Anyone ever heard of him? He wrote the Shulchan Aruch. right? One of the Torah giants in the 1700s, right? An unbelievable Torah scholar, rabbinic scholar, etc. So he holds, clear as day, he holds, you're allowed to charge for Torah, right? People can pay for that, one condition. The condition is that you're not charging them through the roof. If you're charging them through extortion, and you're going to say this is a ton of money, for instance, how'd I get on this whole topic a year ago, year and a half ago, we did this on Tanakh Talk, and that was someone had put up a post on Facebook, and someone was saying how someone was saying was selling a bunch of discs on how to be a Noahide. Now, the way they were selling it was they were selling it for a lot of money, a lot of money, and they were saying if you don't buy these discs, you will never know how to be a Noahide. So someone put up this post, whatever, made a few comments. Now, what did that say? Right? What was the inference over here? The inference of what this person was saying with this post was you're not allowed to charge. Charging for these things is forbidden. Why? Because some idiot comes out and says, I have all the knowledge of being a Noahide. You're going to come to me. I got 7 discs. I'm going to charge you $1,500. And if not, okay, you'll die. Good luck. That's the way it sounded. So I contacted this person off, privately. And I said, by the way, people are going to infer that charging for classes is absurd. It is prohibited. So he profusely apologized. No, I didn't have you in mind. You do great work. I wasn't offended. Right? Definitely wasn't offended. But I wanted the person to make clear that when you put something up, you make sure it's clear. You make sure, beyond the shadow of a doubt, nobody's going to misread it. Nobody's going to misinterpret it, because I wasn't the only one. Again, it wasn't directed towards me. And if it was, doesn't matter. Right? But the fact is, if someone could misinterpret that, then there's a problem with the message. There's a problem with the message. Right? So now, what are people going to say? Oh, that is the wrong way to try and market something. Because you're going to say, people do that. They say, well, if you don't get this thing, right, you're not going to get the information. You're not going to be able to do this. You're not going to be able to be successful. Could be true, could not be true. Right? But what about spirituality? First of all, how can you put a price on it? That's one thing. And second of all, how can you say this is the only way? Right? 70 faces to Torah. Right? There's 70 ways to learn, but it has to be within certain parameters. Now, when it comes to a Noahide, it's crazy because, there are very few things that are 100% clear cut. Right? So there's a lot of fraud and everything. And, I spoke about fraud last week, so we're not going to go there. But the point is, and this is where the cognitive dissonance is that you would pay for anything online, right? You pay for a subscription to a website. For stupid things. You pay for, this program is going to say it's going to, an MLM, you got to do this marketing thing. You're going to make money, passive income. Everyone wants to do that. Doesn't work. You have to work 10 times harder to do it. Whatever. All these things, people willing to pay. When it comes to Torah, there's cognitive dissonance. Why? I think there's one very simple reason. If you're part of the church, you get a lot for free. Because the church has money. Okay, they take out this big ore, you put money in, whatever. They got money. The church is not lacking. Right? Synagogues, yeshivas, girls' schools, they're lacking. The church isn't lacking. The church got plenty of money. Church got plenty of money. So if the church has plenty of money, and they have all these services, you come to me and you say, look, I'm getting all this for free. Why can't you teach me for free? Now, as a disclaimer, I will tell people this is my price. And if you can't pay it, I'll still take them. Right? But time is worth something. Education, right? Education, I won't even tell you what I'm making an hour. Education is worth something. Right? No, life experience. If I was a life coach, I could be a life coach, right? A spiritual life coach, helping people get from A to B, answering people's questions, inspiring them, giving them direction, all these things. Who's not going to pay for that? That's a life change. I'm not talking about mathematics. I'm not talking about MLM. I'm not talking about digital marketing. I'm not talking about any of these things. But something that's really important, right? That's really important about life and about living life the way God wants. And someone's willing to give you that information and all that experience. And you're going to say, I want it for free. Okay. You'll get certain things for free. There's a lot of things that are free out there, right? Which is part of the problem. Some good, some bad, right? But at the end of the day, you can't say that's extortion because it makes no difference. It makes no difference what the person knows, right? Whether it's mathematics, whether it's sports, whether it's psychology, any of these things, their education, they can charge whatever they charge, right? But people get caught up and say, oh, it's a spiritual thing. I shouldn't have to pay, right? But what about the years of study? You think it's easy? You're not going to get the information. You get a hodgepodge here, a hodgepodge there, a class here, a class this. You don't see the whole picture because you're not learning it on your own. You don't have someone to take you through. I'm not saying everything you need, someone to hold you by the hand and take you through it. But if you're coming out of Christianity, you have no frame of reference. You have zero frame of reference because everything you've been taught has been wrong. Right? So that being the case, it makes a person's job 10 times harder to re-squeegee the brain, to understand what it means to think like a Jew or a non-Jew that wants to rethink what it means to live according to the Torah, as a non-Jew. Now, if you've come out of Christianity and you have nowhere to go, you hear a class here, a class there, that's good, right? But, if you're going to learn by somebody, you're going to, take someone on as their, as your mentor, that person should have, we spoke last week what their character traits have to be. They certainly have to have the knowledge, but also more important, they themselves have to have a mentor, right? They also have to have that experience. They have to know how to relate, how to give it over. It's not an easy thing, right? It's by far not an easy thing, right? But in the end, all these things are exactly the same. You're paying for what the person knows, and you're paying for that knowledge, and that knowledge, hopefully, you didn't lose money on. In other words, that you're gaining for life. If you're taking on this whole new lifestyle, and you're going to change, and someone's got world-class experience, life experience, knowledge, all these things, and they can set you in the right direction, you cannot expect that to be for free. If someone's willing to do it, all the power to them, right? They're willing to take the time, they're willing to put in the effort, all that. I tip my hat off. All the power to them, right? But if someone's going to give a class and they're going to give her their time, an hour a week, 2 hours a week, whatever it is, how in the world can you say it's not worth my time? It's not worth your time. Don't take the class, right? But don't say, the value's not there. Okay, if the value's not there, I agree. It's not worth it. If the value's there, how can you say I want it for free? Right? That doesn't make logical sense because you would never say this in anything else. It only when it comes to spirituality, right? And, you have this whole thing about, Torah should really be taught for free. That was a different world. We're not living in the same world. If it would be, you're teaching in the school and the parents are giving you this and they're giving you that, forget about a salary, but they're taking care of your needs to teach their kids, right? That's the way it was, right? That's the world we're looking at. Look at the Kohanim. That's how they live their lives. Like, oh, look. He's a schnorrer, right? He just puts out his hand. You should support him. He's doing all the sacrifices, right? He's supporting the world by learning, as well and teaching. He shouldn't be compensated, right? How should he not be compensated? Some of the sacrifices he gets to eat from. Some of them he gets some of the wool. He gets some of the, they make it into clothing, other things. He's got to live. He's got to support his family. Right? People say, let him get another job. What do you mean get another job? That's what he's supposed to be doing. That is his job, right? People who sit and learn, if they're able to sit and learn, they're holding up the world. So normally the wife works, the parents and the in-laws try and help as well. All right, to a certain point, the person won't be able to do that, right? It depends for how long. But at the end of the day, you're gonna say, oh look, he's being supported, he's taking handouts, whatever. Imagine someone's writing, doing a master's or PhD, and they're writing a book on tax law. Now, they're writing a book on tax law. I can't even tell you what that does for the world. You write the book on tax law, And at the end of the day, he gets a dorm paid for. He gets a food voucher. They don't say, "Oh, look, he's a sponge. He's sponging off, the community and the university." They say, "Of course not. He has to be compensated. He's working hard. He's writing a book on tax law." You hear the irony? That's more important. But if you say, listen, someone is sacrificing their life to give to other people, and they're learning, and they're doing it at a high level, and you're going to say, oh, well, get another job, do something else, whatever, why should you be supported? Does that make any sense? It doesn't make any logical sense, right? But people will say, for spiritual things, I'm not willing to pay. I'm not willing to pay, right? I can't explain the logic, right? The logic in every other aspect is totally diametrically opposed, right? The only somewhat answer I have, there are two answers. One is, there's plenty of stuff on the internet that's for free. True. That's 100% true, right? And the second thing is, when people grew up and they were part of the church had plenty of money, right? The churches aren't poor, so they're being helped anyway. They're getting these services. Okay, you might have to give something here, something there, right? But they're being taken care of, right? So even though there's so many good things, on the internet that's free, that's great, right? I think it's a tremendous thing. I listen to a lot of things also, get a lot of strength from, right? But, these things don't run by themselves, right? Torah Anytime, anyone who knows about Torah Anytime, got hundreds, thousands of classes, online. It takes time to put these things up and to organize and all these things. So every year or every half a year, they have fundraisers to be supported. You say, oh, they shouldn't be doing that. They should be doing it for the goodness of their heart. You know what they're doing? All these classes that give people inspiration. Support them. I don't care. Give them $5 a month. Give them $2. Give them something. When they have a fundraiser, because they're doing great things. They're inspiring people, keeping people on the right direction. Right, as long as the speakers are good, right? Keeping them in the, on the right path. That's something worthwhile. Yeshivas, girls' schools, these other things. They always need money, right? They always need money. So they're bringing up the next generation, right? They're teaching the next generation. You say, well, you should get another job. If you can't make enough money, they're doing all kinds of things trying to make ends meet, right? But yeshivas always need money. They need to fundraise. Other things, but they'll say, oh, but what about tutoring? Tutoring's not the same thing. I'll give you one example. I don't want to harp on this too much, right? I'll give you one example. I took a mentorship program to learn how to sell real estate. To find undervalued properties, given over to, someone else, and you get the whatever finder's fee. So the mentor, and this was not a cheap thing, it was a 6-month course. He would do a live call once a week. And if you had a question to ask him, you could send him an email, but if it was really important, you send him a fax. That's how he'd answer you. Right? Now, this is about real estate. This guy making good money, very, very good money. You never got a hold of him. If you really needed him, you send him a fax. That's how we would answer, right? If it was like that important. Everything else, 6 months. He would answer your questions eventually, right? But this guy was making a mint. He was making a mint. So no one's going to say, oh, look at him. That's not fair. Right, but he's giving of his knowledge. Think about it. He's giving of his knowledge and 20 years experience. And he's seen what's failed and what hasn't failed. And he said, this is foolproof. If you do it, you're going to succeed. And people succeeded. I also succeeded to a certain extent. That is worth, it's a mentorship, it's a private thing, whatever. It's worth a lot of money. And he's charging a lot of money. You get these gurus in digital marketing. They charge a mint. They charge a mint for what they can do for companies. Right? So if you got the money, you pay it. If you don't have the money, they're not going to take you. They're not working on necessarily on payment plans. Some will, some won't, right? That's not really the point, right? But the point is, you're not going to haggle on the price. Why? Why aren't you going to haggle on the price? Because you're getting the value, or at least you believe you're getting the value. I had someone come to a class I gave the other day, very, very powerful class on the book of Leviticus and the purpose of life and all that for 2 hours. They said, wow, He said, I got more value than I put in. I said, of course you did. Of course you did, right? Because I gave everything I had, right? But I'm making people understand what it means to think like a Jew, but to see it through the Torah's eyes, right? Now, can you put a price on that? That's priceless. You can't put a price on that. There's no price. There's no price on that, right? But in the end, you can't say you should be doing it for free, right? That is just a fallacy. That's a fallacy that's as we say in Hebrew, lo hayav lo nivra, like never was and never will be, because it doesn't make sense in any other aspect of life. A plumber comes to the door, you're not going to say, I don't think you should charge me. You're not going to haggle with him. A friend of mine's a computer consultant. If you couldn't figure out how to turn on the computer, he walks in your door, it's $100. He's charging you $100. You're not going to haggle with him. That's the price. I had something go wrong with a washing machine, right? I had to pay this guy a certain amount of money to fix it. A week later, something else happened, not connected. There was no arguing on the price. It was something different. My luck. That was my luck. Okay, right? Whatever it was. I'm not saying, can you give me a break on it? It wasn't the same thing, right? You take your car to a mechanic. First it's the brakes, then it's the carburetor. My kesher, there's no connection. Right? The carburetor has nothing to do with the brakes. Your air coolant thing goes, and then you pop a tire. You go to the tire guy and say, what do I have to pay the air coolant for? He's going to look at you like you have three heads. Right? But all this is connected. Right? So if it's connected, you can't say, I deserve it for free. A person can say, I'd love to pay. I only have so much, or whatever. Your time is worth something. You have to admit that. Someone's time is worth something. Yeah.
Rabbi, I just want to say, because you're bringing up plenty of analogies, and we see this more and more every day, that, like you mentioned, the automotive industry. And I find today, in this day and age, in that industry specifically, mechanics, for the most part, are more replacement technicians rather than, the old school automotive, where a guy would fix something. Now they just replace a part. And, I find that, say, their flat door rate is understandable, whether it's $80, $100, $150. I mean, whatever the case might be. But they also, on top of that, we see this more and more, where they actually design a map or a direction, and a knowledgeable mechanic might be able to go right to the source, fix the problem. But they're following a checklist. We need to check this first, then that first, then that, then that, then that. Right. So they make you pay for this, and the item that needs to be fixed is number 17 on the list. So you're paying for all this to get to that. And we see people designing and doctoring and to the point where it's robbery. And especially in the automotive industry, you have the dawn of something called a specialty tool, where nobody has access to this tool but them, so you have to go to them. And so they actually design breakdown into components so that you have to come back to them. And there's all this feedback. And so when is it theft? And when it comes to, dealing with Torah, we know how invaluable it is. This is why we're all tuning in, and we want to know from the Jewish people exactly what pure Torah is. But when there's people out there, maybe making us go down the rabbit hole in a different direction, or making us go through 22 stages before we get to the question we asked or the answer, I don't know. Maybe a lot of us need to actually ask the right questions.
No, that if the automobile industry, you're 100% right. Like what goes on here is the parts. Sometimes the parts are more expensive, less expensive, depends on the type of car, whatever it is. But they're charging labor also. They're not going through their, they'll go through whatever. Okay, I check this, I check that, whatever. And, in the end, they say, okay, this is the problem, right? But they, once they start working on it, regardless of how much the part costs, they're charging you for labor, right? That's why a lot of people go to the Arabs, because it's 10 times cheaper, right? Even though it's 10 times cheaper, but, you have no idea what they're going to do to your car. Right. That's, obviously it's going to be someone licensed, even if they have Arab workers, which they do. Right. But at least it's someone, Jewish owned. At least, hopefully, you're not going to get ripped off. But that's a very good example. It's probably one of the most ripped off ripped off things that that there are that by the by that industry 100%. But also within Torah 100% right, because people could be led down the wrong direction. They come out of Christianity and say, "Oh, I saw something about messianics. I'll check them out. I saw something about this. I'll check that." And then they end up going like around in circles. So finally say, "Wait a minute, this is all garbage. Why didn't I get the right thing? Right? Why didn't I get to the right source at the beginning?" So that could be dependent on a whole number of things. Could be God wants to see how much you're a real seeker and whatever, and could be, I mean, it could be dependent on all kinds of things. But in general, that is that definitely definitely a good analogy for that. So one of the things that why would a person acquire a friend? By paying them, right? One is that they have somebody who's going to be objective, and somebody's going to help them reach their potential, and they're going to help them, and they're going to get rebuked. They're going to get rebuked when they need to be rebuked. Right? Everyone needs at some, at some level to be, to be rebuked, to be told what they're doing, isn't necessarily right. So there are three reasons why it's important to acquire a friend. Talmud tells us one is for the sake of Torah. Why? Because a lot of Torah I learned from my rabbis, Talmud tells us, and my friends I learned from more. Right? In other words, you learn a lot from your rabbis, but you also, right, you learn more from your friends, right? What they do, how they act. For instance, second thing is, why would you acquire a friend? For the sake of mitzvahs. Meaning, even though this person might not be as righteous, he might not be as religious as you, he certainly might make mistakes, right? He certainly might make mistakes, but when he sees you going in the wrong direction, he's going to stop you, right? He's going to chastise you. Why? Because he wants you to be better, right? He wants you to be held at a higher standard. And when you're held at a higher standard, you'll grow. You'll grow more. So, that's part of his job. Third thing is he's going to give advice. He's going to give advice where he can help a person make decisions and aid in giving them direction. Now, I'm not saying you have to pay a min for this person, right? But, if a person wants someone as a mentor, let's say, they want him as a mentor. They want them to teach them. They want them to guide them. They want them to, put them in the right direction. That's something they'll pay for, right? Even if you tell me, well, if the rabbi should do it for free, this is something that it's worthwhile. Why? It's worthwhile because they're going to get what they need. Hopefully this person's going to give them what they need. And they're getting something in value, right? That something in value is called direction in life. Direction in life, the proper way, you can't even put a price on that, right? That's what we said before. There is no price. I can tell you, I have a student that is going to convert soon, hopefully. And they told me when they came to me, now again, it's not, no bragging rights over it. They've been learning on their own for close to 10 years, learning about Judaism. So they said, when I came to you and I started these classes, the knowledge that you gave within a month blasted away what I did for 10 years. Now, why should that be? Because I'm brilliant and I'm good, right? It's good for my ego. I'm working on my humility, right? We'll get there. No, but the thing is that a person can learn, and get book smart. It's not the same, as someone who's already lived it, someone who has experience in it, and someone who can give direction. That's a whole different, that's a whole different ball game, right? That is worth money. That's certainly worth money. And a person to have their life changed for the positive, and their eyes have been opened, wouldn't people want to pay for that? They shouldn't want to pay for that. It has value. It has value. But the problem is, spiritual ideas and that type of thing, you can't put a price tag on. Right now, if someone's, let's say, a life coach, okay, so you get paid a certain amount an hour, whatever, you're helping them get from A to B, right? Someone who'd be, let's say, a spiritual coach is no different, right? You're helping them in their issues if you can help them and guide them, whatever. But there is a price tag for that, right? And therefore, if someone's got all that experience and all that information, then someone is going to be willing to pay that price, right? Or whatever, something similar, whatever, because they're getting value. If they weren't getting value, they'd stop, right? They go on to someone else or whatever. So that is basically the idea of acquiring a friend. Now, whole next topic here going to be interesting as well, and that is judging someone favorably. Now, the question is, right? The $1 million question is, when does that apply? Right? Does it mean across the board, anytime I see a person in a situation, I always have to judge them favorably? Maybe that's what it sounds like. It says judge everyone favorably. Right? I remember when I was in middle school, right? We were in shop class. So my teacher would say, all right, in 4 words or less, what does it mean? Don't touch the vices. In 4 words or less. Judge someone favorably. 3 words. How would I view this? I would say everybody across the board. Right? Forget commentary, forget anything. Judge everyone favorably means that. Well, what if he's a pedophile? And he does something. I have to judge him favorably. So, someone who cheats on their taxes, someone who makes an obnoxious comment, or someone who does something, right? So what are the parameters over here? So, right? So if somebody does something, and it's hard to judge whether it's good or bad. This means we don't know if the person is righteous or not. It's not clear what direction this person's going, if he's going up or down. So now, this person, we're not sure where they're holding. They do something that could go either way. Right? It could either be good or it could be bad. So if the person, is an average Joe, you should judge him favorably, even if it looks bad. Even if it looks really bad. You judge him favorably. If someone is evil, someone who spits in God's face, even if they don't know anything, right? Let's make clear. Doesn't matter what their level of knowledge is in Torah. If they go against God and there's something that they do, it could be judged for better or for worse, you judge it for worse. There is no mitzvah to judge them favorably. So, you'll say, why not? Why don't you give them benefit of the doubt? If a person speaks Lashon Hara, if a person, constantly belittles others, and they do other things against Torah, and they don't keep Shabbos, and they don't keep the festivals, and they don't do what they should do, why should I judge them favorably? Right? Why is there a mitzvah? Someone will say, well, if they don't know anything, it's not their fault. You're right. Ignorance is bliss to a point. They're going to pay a price. They're definitely going to pay a serious price for what they do. Ignorance, we can't say, because they don't know anything, they weren't taught, doesn't matter. Right? For all you Noahides out there, if you don't do tshuva, if you don't repent, and you idol worshipers, you're finished. I can take a gun and blow your head off. Not a problem. No offense. You like the CFL. Boom. Right? No offense. No offense. Right? So you get the death penalty. We don't care if you're ignorant. You know why a Noahide gets a death penalty? Very simple. Because the laws of being a Noahide are universal. Universal according to the Torah. So you get upstairs after 120 years, God's going to say, hey, what did you do with your life? You didn't hold the Noahide laws. Say, Noahide laws? What are they? They're universal laws. Don't steal. He said, I didn't steal. What did I do wrong? Okay, can we, let's play back the video. Can we show, 1977, tax returns. You declared this and this and this, and you didn't do it. No, that's different. The IRS, nails people for no reason, and they deserve to have money be hidden. Okay, God says, let me ask you, that's not true. If that's not true, is that stealing? Boom. Murder. These things are universal. Right? It doesn't matter what you know or what you don't know. You're liable for the death penalty unless you do tshuva. Unless you repent, it's game over. Right? So I don't care not me. The Torah doesn't care whether this person knows something or not. As a Jew, why in the world do I have a mitzvah to judge them favorably? Now, if there's a better reason to judge them favorably, more than the other way, if I want to, if I want to go beyond the letter of the law, I could do that. But there's no mitzvah to. And I think this might come, since I saw your reaction, I think that, this comes as a shock, to some people, because you say, of course, doesn't matter if they don't know anything. I should give them the benefit of the doubt. But when it comes to Torah, they can't be witnesses. I can't listen to them. They have no say. So I don't have to give them the benefit of the doubt. Now, what if someone is righteous? This can come up. Someone who's a righteous individual. They've done something that looks questionable. You're obligated to judge them favorably. Right? The reason is because you can never judge a rabbinic scholar not in a favorable way. Now, even if it looks really bad. I just heard a story today. Somebody who has an Orthodox Jew is a prominent position. And, he works for the country. He's got a certain position. And there was a memo that went out in his name. And it said that he was pro-abortion and pro-gay. Now, this is an elected position. Jewish papers came out against him, strangled him, and, certainly didn't give him the benefit of the doubt, working for, Jewish causes for years, working in the government, etc. So he got demolished in the press, even the Jewish press. So one of the rabbis in this city called him up, wanted to hear what happened. Right, so what happened? So he's got a very close connection to this person. Person came to meet with him, and this rabbi said, I have no doubts in my mind that you did this. No doubt in my mind because of this Mishnah. You have to judge favorably, even if it looks bad. So he said, can you explain what happened? So he said he was taken over for somebody else, someone else in this position, and that memo still had his name on it. So he didn't look at it. It was just stamped and it went out. He didn't see it.
Wow.
So this rabbi understood the Mishnah and said, this guy's not corrupt. This guy's a proper upstanding, person, and he does unbelievable work for the Jewish people. So people were sitting there killing him. And he said, I'm not going to kill him. I want to see what happened. But then he said these Jewish papers came out against him. Why didn't they ask him before they printed the story? Right. That's lashon hara against him. Why didn't they do that? Oh, it's a juicy story. Look, this person, in a nice position. Look, it goes against what he says, what the Torah says. Right. There's the whole question. If it's going to hurt him, in the next election, is he better not to say anything about these things, or he still has to come out against it? For sure, he has to come out against it. Right, the Torah, you can't be passive over here. Even if it's going to cost him votes, right? But in the end, this is a good example. Mm-hmm. This is a very good example where this looked really bad, really, really bad, right? But at the same time, you got to judge him favorably because something else must be going on. Yeah.
I just want to ask a question in that light, sort of, because we got somebody new online that I'm not familiar with, named Nancy. Asking about what would constitute idol worship. And we know that as B'nai Noach, we get a lot of people coming out of Christianity that don't understand the fine line, the definition. And, a lot of them do believe in the Father. They're coming out and where is that fine line that you can believe, in the Father and you can judge them favorably, but where is that boundary line that they've crossed? Basically, there is
no boundary line over here. If they're a Christian, doesn't matter how convoluted it sounds, right? God doesn't have a prodigal son, right? It's not me, myself, and I, the Sybil complex. That's idolatry, right? That's it's something God can't, it's not going to do, right? So therefore, belief in that with belief in the fact that. You have this other person, immaculate conception or not, or whatever the case is. Once you believe in that, and there's some triumvirate or whatever. That's that is definitely
putting a
that's definitely
box.
idolatry. If you say there's one God, there's only one God, right? Then what do you need JC for? Right? Then you're going to say, well, I need him because he died for all our sins and all this and all that, but that's hogwash. It goes against the Torah. Right? Totally goes against the Torah. Once a person says, this is my God, right? You say, this is my God, short little fat guy, right? Fatso, Mr. Buddha. He says, Mr. Buddha is my God. He's out. That's idolatry, even if you don't bow down to him. You don't have to. There are specific things you have to do for idolatry. You have to bow down to it, right, etc. There was a question if you had, $100 bill. I think I mentioned this once before. If you have $100 bill in front of an idol, and you want to lean over, bend down, and pick it up, can't do that. You're not allowed to do it. That's the way you serve. That's the way you serve an idol. You get, you bend, you bow down. That's idolatry. Doesn't matter. You know what you're doing. You don't believe in it. You could say 100 times in your mind, or even with your mouth, I'm not serving. I'm not serving. Ooh, right? Whatever. He bends down to pick up the money. That's called idolatry. Now, so you're gonna say I got a $100 bill. How am I supposed to pick it up? Right? So the simple answer is you turn around, turn your back to the idol, you can crouch down and pick it up. Why are you allowed to do that? You're crouching down, but you're not facing the idol. That's not the way they served an idol. There was an idol called Markulis. Mr. Coolest, Mar meaning Mr. or Master, right? Just a play on the name because you're allowed to make, that's why I say short little fat guy, right? A guy hanging on a stick. It's a mitzvah to make fun of idolatry because it has no power. Go ahead, do something. Woohoo! Right? It has no power. So how did they serve Markulis? They threw rocks at it. Right? They threw stones at it. Now, if I would take a huge boulder, or some stones, big stones, small stones, this, that, and I started throwing it. Now, baseball practice, right? We're in spring training, right? They're all down in Florida, pitchers and catchers. Bam, bam. I start throwing it, doing all my change-ups and all this, and I'm making fun of it left and right. That's a Torah prohibition. Why is that a Torah prohibition? Because that's the way you serve it. Right? There's a story in the Talmud, Baal Peor, right? The famous idol they defecated in front of. They say, there's a group that does that in Germany, other places in Europe. Hard to imagine, but any case, there's a story. It was a story of Rabbi said, I'm gonna have fun with this idol, right? Not only defecated it, did something with the feces, put it all over him, whatever it was. And he says, why? So what did idolaters say? And this was a transgression. Because the idolaters, wow, we've never seen anyone worship this idol that way. And he got taken a task. Why? Because that's the way you serve it. Okay, so he did a little bit of extra. Put a smiley face on it. I don't know, whatever he did. He did extra. When he did extra, but that's the way it was served, that's forbidden. Doesn't matter what your intention is, right? So if you believe in JC and the Father and all that, that's idolatry. I don't care what your intention is. That's idolatry, right? Even if you don't bow down to him, right? But you believe in that, right? So that's that is certainly idolatry. There is a difference of opinion among rabbinical authorities. For sure, for a Jew, 100%, that is idolatry, right? There's a question among later authorities whether for a non-Jew that applies or not. But a lot of rabbinical authorities definitely hold, that is true. Yeah.
Okay, just to ask one more question, Rabbi, without digressing, but since we're on this point about judging favorably, I understand, especially more prominent in the Middle East and in old Asia Minor area, there's something known as the evil eye, and I know that it plays a factor in today's social media where everybody's peering with a negative outlook, and it has genuine effects, and it wreaks all kinds of havoc. And I think it's contrary to what you're trying to get across with the judging everybody favorably. Can you give us a picture of the dichotomy between what an evil eye is versus, say, judging favorably when somebody's factually looking at things?
You want to see mine?
Well, my point is that there was an old superstition, from what I understand, that even a lot of marriages that go on in the Middle East,
It's not
they
just,
wear
it's not,
garments to dissuade people from an evil eye, and
all
the
right,
point is,
let's make clear. The evil eye is not just in the Middle East. The evil eye, the Talmud says, 99% of everybody in the world dies because of it. Now, what exactly is the evil eye? The evil eye is that, let's say a person's very successful, right? A person has money, got a nice house, got a beautiful wife, beautiful kids, fancy things, and he flaunts it. What does that create in people? Jealousy. Jealousy, right? Now, what can happen? A person may feel bad. They say, wow, this person's flaunting it. I barely make ends meet, right? And that person, that person, this guy doesn't give so much charity or whatever the case is, you feel bad, right? You feel bad. So what happens at that point where a person is suffering? That suffering goes up to heaven. Now that suffering goes up to heaven. An angel takes it up to heaven and puts it in front of God. And God says, okay, this person's suffering, this person's in pain because of this other person. Let's open up their file. Let's open up this other person's file. Now, the only time during the year you want your file opened is on Rosh Hashanah. Right? Rosh Hashanah is a day of judgment. Even non-Jews, even if they don't know it, they'll know now. They get judged. There is judgment for non-Jews as well. Right? What they did, if they deserve to live, they deserve to die. Obviously, they don't have to observe Rosh Hashanah, but right there's an idea that the entire world, we don't just say all Jews get judged. So, on the prayers in Rosh Hashanah, we say Yom Haras Olam. This is the day of creation. Commemorate creation. Right? Creation of what? Creation of man, not Jews. We're the only religion, quote unquote, that's universal. Everyone else, if you don't believe in, JC, like time never happened. Before him, nothing. Right? Otherwise, you're going to fry in hell forever. Before Muhammad's flight from Mecca to Medina, all life didn't exist. Nothing happened. Judaism says, you want to believe in one God? Great. You want to convert? Fine. You don't want to convert? You still have a portion of the world to come. But realize, if you don't keep what you're supposed to keep, you're going to pay. We don't say, be like us or die, or you're going to die. We say it's universal. Okay, it depends how much you want to tap in. But the point is that when that person's been flaunting himself and he makes somebody feel bad, it doesn't matter. He could have said something, could have done something. Doesn't mean he had money. Could be someone gets made jealous or is upset about something that somebody said or did or whatever. They can sort of put this hex on you. What's the hex? The hex is that God now feels the pain of this person and he wants to see if it's justified. So what does God do? He opens up your file. He says, okay, let's see where John Smith is holding. Right? Let's see where he's holding. Is he really that bad? And if your file gets opened when it doesn't need to be opened, you're going to get scrutinized worse than the IRS. Right? And God's going to go through with a fine tooth comb to see what you've done. And if he really feels that you made this person suffer, then there's going to be payback. And it could be very strong payback. That's why anyone who has money, you don't flaunt it. Even if you do nicer things or whatever, be like everybody else. Because if you cause someone to be jealous, in any which way, and you cause them pain, now it might not be necessarily your fault. Right? Let's say you don't have a new car, but I don't know. So you're just on a roll, right? You're doing this good, you're doing that good, you're doing that thing, and I don't know, someone gets ticked off somewhere. Maybe you said something to them you shouldn't have said, maybe you did something or whatever, and they feel that pain. Now, it doesn't matter why they feel the pain, right? You may be innocent, right? But the fact is that they feel the pain or that they're upset. That's what the evil eye is, right? There are a number of signs. There are a number of signs according to Kabbalah. What it is. But if you don't believe in it, one of the ways out of it that you won't necessarily have this issue is that's brought down that if you don't believe it, it doesn't affect you. In other words, if you don't take it, if you don't take it to heart, you can say, all right, but this guy suffered or whatever, right? It doesn't matter, right? The point is that some people say, don't worry about it. Now, my Rebbe was very big in this. He was very, very big in these type of things. It's not something, it's not something to be, to be messed with. I'll just tell one story that, a person can have like a lot of things go wrong in their life, and it could be the cause of this. But I had somebody once poo the whole thing. It's like, oh, your Rebbe knows this and he knows that. Like, what does he know about the evil eye, what we call ayin hara? Right? Like, what does he know? Like, okay, he's got like 3-4 books of Kabbalah in his house. Knows quite a bit about Kabbalah also. But if I asked this person, the person was just like making fun and scoffing a little bit. So I asked him. I said, there are 12 signs. 12 signs according to Kabbalah. The signs that a person has an ayin hara, has this evil eye on them. I said, name me one. I said, name me one. I said, if you can't name me one, get out of my way. You don't have what I don't care if you don't believe in it. There are 12 signs. And my Rebbe's daughter once told me, he was at the Western Wall once, someone looked at him in a certain way, and he felt, he felt this. So again, either you believe in it strong, or you don't. There are a lot of people who don't mess with this. Right? You do not want to cause jealousy among anybody. Right? You don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. You want to be careful on a regular basis what you do, because the repercussions could be unbelievable. Right? There's a reason why the Talmud says 99% of the people die because of it. Right? It's not, sometimes you could say something like that, oh, it's an exaggeration. Right? Maybe they didn't mean exactly that or whatever. It's an exaggeration. Right? But, there are people who've gone through certain things that according to nature don't make sense. And had different things happen to them. It could be caused because of this. Definitely could be caused because of that's why. So what do you do? What do you do if you think you have this? So there are certain people that throughout the generations know how to take care of this. They have this cauldron. They pour lead. When they pour the lead out, if it comes out, in like different forms of eyes or something, that means you have the evil eye. They can take it off. Whatever it is, it's it can be very dangerous. Let's just put it that way. It can be extremely dangerous. So we always have to be careful. Let's say you're in a supermarket, and you bang into someone. Oh,
we lost your speaker again, Rabbi. Hang on. Let's see if I can pull this up. I do not know why. I might be having a faulty audio card. My audio card could be breaking, and the computer, I only ordered it custom from Dell in July. Shame. I don't know what to say. I think we got you back, Rabbi.
okay, you hear me? We're good?
Oh, we're good now. Yes.
Okay, so no problem. So this idea of the evil eye, people do not want to mess with. Right? Now again, you have to be careful no matter what you do. You certainly don't want someone to say, oh, look what this person does and whatever. And you might have slighted someone, even if you didn't do it intentionally. Because anything that's going to go upstairs and your file's going to be open, I guarantee you don't want it. If you don't want to be combed by the IRS in any way, shape, or form, you definitely don't want this. So let's finish up the Mishnah here. So the Mishnah says, so we mentioned, right? We mentioned about judging a rabbinic scholar, right? They should always be judged in a favorable way, right? Now, even if it looks bad, right? Because if a person, let's say a rabbinic scholar did something wrong, At night, Talmud tells us, we can assume he repented. Right? We can assume by the morning he repented. Now, again, it depends who the person is or whatever, but in general, someone who's at that level, he did something wrong, he's going to repent, so nothing to worry about. Now, over here, the Mishnah says, make for yourself a teacher. Right? It says, judge someone favorably. Why? What's the connection in the language? Well, it's showing that it's related. Why? So it could be we should be more stringent to judge someone favorably, and you should be able to find a friend or a rabbi to do that. Right? That's the connection. You'll find a friend or a teacher who'll be able to help you judge them favorably. But if you judge them in an improper way, and you're only interested, and this is very easy, especially in social media, you'll find the blemishes. You will disqualify them as being friends of yours, all the more so if it's a rabbi, right? If he does something wrong, in your eyes, that's it. You're not going to judge them favorably, right? You're going to trash them. I mean, if they deserve not to be judged favorably and they say crazy things and do crazy things, yeah, there's no mitzvah to judge them favorably, no question. No question about that. Others say it means we should look at everyone in general, not in detail. You look at people not necessarily in detail. Why not? Because you've scrutinized what everybody does, and this is easy to do. Right? You scrutinize what people do, it's going to be very easy to find the blemish. Very, very easy. Because you're just harping on the negative. So when we say to judge someone here, it means to look into it like any other law on all sides. Because if you look at it on all sides, you probably come up with a way to judge them favorably. But again, it's going to depend on the person's personality. Because there are people out there who like to see people fail. Who like to make fun of people and put them down. Why? That's what Lashon Hara is. Because you have no tangible benefit of speaking negatively against someone. The only thing, why does a person speak negatively against someone? Because you put them down to put yourself up higher, right? To put yourself on a pedestal, right? So over here, if that's what you do on a regular basis and you're Mr. Negative, right? You're Joe Negative, then you're just going to harp on the negative. You're just going to find the blemishes, right? But if you look at it like any other law, on all sides, you'll find the merit. Now, the last thing here is an interesting thing that there's a question about why Abraham goes to pray for the people of Sodom. Right? The Torah says, Genesis chapter 19, verse 27, Torah says Avram gets up in the morning, gets up early to the place where he stood before Hashem, which tells us that he went to pray on behalf of Sodom. Now the question is, why did he only do it in the morning? Really, he should have done it at night. He should have gone at night. Why did he go in the morning? Now you have to ask, why is he praying for them? If there are 50 righteous people, 40 righteous people, these were scum of the earth. The entire place, God says, I'm going to flatten it like a pancake. I'm going to put cement, cement down, and I'm going to put up McDonald's. We're going to call it even. We're just going to wipe the place out. Why is he asking? Why in the world is he asking that God should find merit for them? Doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? The 10 righteous people, 40 righteous people, 50 righteous people. There aren't righteous people there. What's he looking for? Right? So instead of praying at night, he didn't want anyone to come with him when he went to pray on their behalf. Looks bad. If he's praying on their behalf, someone's going to be and say, oh, these people are so evil. What are you praying them for? Aren't you this great Abraham? One God and all that and morals? These people are the most immoral people ever created. Right? Even worse than San Francisco. Right? They're 10 times worse. So you wipe them out. What are you giving them a merit for? Comes on the Satmar Rebbe of Yoel Teitelbaum, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. Name should be blessed. He asked, why did Abraham not want anyone to come with him? Right? Not for the fact that he could have prayed on their behalf at night. Right? It's what we mentioned. But no. He says Abraham didn't want anyone to hear him trying to find any merit. If someone's evil, didn't we say? He's evil! No merit for them. They don't deserve to find any merit if they're evil. So then it says that he arose early in the morning and he stood before Hashem. So says the Satmar Rebbe, why does it say he stood before Hashem? Why specifically that language? Because if you're going to judge someone favorably, it can only be done in front of God. And if other people hear these words, they're going to say, what are you, out of your mind? Why in the world are you going to judge them favorably? People, famous Abraham, right? He's the greatest person at that time. And everyone's flocking to him. He's like an icon. And everyone's flocking to him. He's converting the men. She's converting the women. Everything's great, right? Sarah's wife. They're going to say, wow, you're finding merit for the people of Sodom? Las Vegas, Sin City. He's going to Sin City, right? That's where Lot was, Sin City. So Sin City doesn't sound so bad. Look, the greatest person of the generation people are flocking to, he's giving them merit. He's saying how great they are. They're going to go flock to Sodom, right? So since it's impossible to go out at night, because they have to go with other people, you're not allowed to go out at night, right? If you go out at night alone, it can be hazardous for your health, right? So you always go out with other people, but he's not going to go with other people, because when he's praying on their behalf, they're going to say, hey, what are you doing? This is Sin City. Oh, must be. It must be Las Vegas. Isn't so bad, right? We're going to send people to Las Vegas. That's a tremendous thing. That's why he had to go by himself, because you cannot judge someone favorably in that way. Certainly if they're evil in front of others. If you're going to do it, first of all, it's forbidden to do anyway. But if you're going to do it in this way, you got to do it only in front of God. Because if you do it only in front of God, God knows the truth. God is emes, right? He's 100% true. So God knows what you're doing. But if you go in the morning, if you do it at night, other people are going to be there, not going to be the same. There's a whole fundamental question here, right? Exactly why Abraham wants to pray for them. Abraham knew they were evil. He totally knew they were evil, right? If they're evil, there's no sense to pray for them, right? What are they going to go against God's decree? They're going to say, God, you're making a mistake, right? So the whole question back and forth between God and Abraham, certainly needs further clarification. Right? What in the world is he arguing about? But I have a whole video on YouTube spoke about it. But he's not arguing in the sense that we should judge them favorably because they're good people. Right? These people are scum buckets. That's what they are. That's what they represent. Clear. You're not going to find anybody there. Right? You're not going to find 10 people there. But Avram still wanted to pray for them. But again, in the right way, where people are not going to hear him, because they're going to get the wrong impression. And that's why there are a lot of things that people do that you shouldn't do in public, because people might get the wrong impression, right? One example in the laws of Shabbos, if a person, let's say, washed clothing before Shabbos and they're wet, so what do you want to do? On Shabbos, you go and take the clothing without wringing them out. You take the clothing, the wet clothing, you hang them on a line outside, right? What's the problem? It's going to dry by itself. The sun will dry it. Right, what's the problem? Problem is, people will say, he's doing laundry on Shabbos. You're not allowed to do laundry on Shabbos. But I didn't. I did it before Shabbos. So I got a great idea. Put a sign. I washed these clothes before Shabbos. Right? I didn't transgress Shabbos. Put a sign. Put a sign on your line. So you don't have a problem. So the rabbi says, wow, that is a great idea. Forbidden. Across the board, it's forbidden. Why? Because of what it looks like. So a person has to be careful, right? Even if a person, let's say a person's dying of thirst, right? An Orthodox Jew's dying of thirst. What's the closest place to him? It's McDonald's, right? McDonald's not kosher, right? Walks into a McDonald's. What is he getting? A cup of water, plastic cup, right? Good old Ronald McDonald on it. Right? Swigs away. Takes another cup. Right? He's very thirsty. Someone looks in there, sees an Orthodox Jew in a McDonald's. So, wow, it must be permitted to eat at McDonald's. Someone could make that conclusion. They're going to say, aye, but is it forbidden? Okay, he's drinking a cup of water. Right? People aren't necessarily going to make that mistake. But again, just want to point out how it could be viewed. That, when a person does something, in public, I'll give another example. There was somebody, Orthodox Jew, was selling clothing, and he sold something to someone, and it had, something embroidered on it. And the first time they washed it, came off. They got washed out. So they were selling this expensive thing with this fancy embroidery. It was fraud. Right? It was fraud. So this person comes screaming back. It was a Jewish woman. And this Jewish woman, comes back and says, how could you do this? And it's fraud and this and that. But what did she say? She said, you're an Orthodox Jew. How could you mislead people? So what did he answer? And this you should never answer if you're a spokesman for God. And obviously this person never did Jewish outreach in his life. And he said, who told you to put Orthodox Jews on such a high pedestal? That is the wrong answer. Across the board. You are not going to bring someone closer to Judaism when you blow them off like that. Right. What should he have done? He said, you're right. Made a mistake. Refund your money. I should be ashamed. 100%. Eat crow and go on. That's what you're going to do. You are not going to say, who says that you should hold me to such a high pedestal? That is an idiot. Right? That you never do. Right? But if a person, so the point is, if a person, is on that level, right? As an Orthodox Jew, he's an ambassador to God. Doesn't matter what level they're on, right? He's an ambassador to God. If you're in public, you got to act like a choir boy, right? You're not going to cut people off on the road. You're not going to push in line. You're not going to be obnoxious. And we're our worst enemy. We're our own worst enemy. Yeah.
Rabbi, you're on a very, very, very strong point on this, and I want to keep that going. It's just I need to ask, because is there not a boundary line where the onus falls on the person doing the looking rather than our responsibility? Yes, we do all that we can humanly possible to try to walk proper, talk proper, act proper,
Right.
Be in the right place and not be in the wrong place, and not be seen as doing something that Hashem may not approve of, even if we're not doing anything that Hashem disapproves of. We don't want to even be seen in that light. But is there not a fine line where the one viewing has onus and responsibility for the way that they're looking at it? I just cannot
that's also
live
true.
to somebody else's drumbeat.
There are a lot of self-hating Jews out there, and a lot of non-Jews don't like Jews, right? And they don't like Orthodox Jews. Why don't they like Orthodox Jews? Because some people do things in business and other things that make us look bad. Now, shouldn't they, if an Italian did it, you can say, oh, all Italians this, we should throw them out of the country. No one's going to say that. No one's going to say that. Right? All these stabbings or whatever in New York, and they were interviewing people, and they were saying, yeah, they deserve this, they deserve that. They bought up all the property, they raised all the prices, and they're throwing us out. Now that might be true, but they're making business, right? But it could be that what they're doing is not a good thing. Even if they want to make money, right? So, we have to do what we need to do. If someone comes along and says, oh, I find this terrible, and I can't believe, I walk down the street, a woman will say, I walk down the street, and the person won't even say hello to me. An Orthodox Jew won't say hello to me. Well, they're modesty reasons, right? But, if the person won't do it for modesty reasons, and someone's going to say, oh, these Orthodox Jews, and they don't even smile, and they don't even this, they have an attitude problem. Right? If someone doesn't do anything wrong, according to what the Torah says, and someone cops an attitude, that's not your fault. Right? That's not your fault. I had somebody, I've had some people say things to me, even, strong things that I might say, and they say, and then I would explain it, and they say, oh, that makes sense. But that depends who the person is. The onus really, a person has to be careful what they say. They have to be careful how they act. If someone takes something out of context, that's their problem, right? If you act in a proper way, and someone makes a snide comment, you didn't do anything. Let's say for argument's sake, you didn't do anything, your kids didn't do anything. And someone just makes, like, why do you have so many kids? But your kids didn't act out. They didn't take anything, right? So what did I do wrong? I'm doing what God wants me to do, so go blow it out your ear. It's not my problem, right? In other words, if they take it the wrong way and they mess up themselves, that's nothing to do with me. If I do something, even somewhat innocent, but someone takes it the wrong way, I got to be careful, right? I myself or others, have to be careful. For instance, I'll give you one example. Here on Yom HaShoah, what we call Holocaust Memorial Day, 10 o'clock on that day, whenever it falls out during the week, there's a siren that goes off. Now, all secular Jews, in this country, will stand up and bow their head for 2 minutes. That's a Goyish custom, right? We did that as a moment of silence when I was in school, when I was in secular school. That's not a Jewish custom. You want to do something, say Tehillim, say Psalms, learn something, whatever. But let's say you're in public. This is a very good example. You're in public. Everybody stands up. You're sitting there. That's a desecration of God's name. Now, you're going to tell me that's not the way to commemorate the memory. I agree. That is not the way to commemorate the memory. That is a Goyish thing. We don't do Goyish things. We don't go in the ways of the non-Jews. You sound like, you feel like an idiot. You go, you sit there for 2 minutes thinking about the 6 million that died with their head between your legs. Great. What does that do for anybody? What does that do for their memory? Do something positive. But if you're in a public place and you don't stand up, that's a desecration. God doesn't want me to stand up. You're right. But if other people are there and they see this Orthodox Jew not stand up, it gives us a bad name. There will people that will do that will not stand up. They're stupid, right? If I'm in a place where it doesn't matter, I'm not going to stand. If I'm in a place where some people may get the wrong impression, I will stand, right? That's not a Torah obligation, not a rabbinical obligation over here. Now, some people might say, you're not allowed to do it anyway. Let them think what they want. Okay. But if you're in a public place and you represent Orthodox Judaism and you're sitting there, they're going to kill you. They're going to demolish you because they say, what? You don't care about the 6 million? You think you're more important? You don't think about them? So what are you going to answer? You're a non-Jew? You do what the non-Jews, and you're going to explain to them what it means to go in the ways of the non-Jews? They're not going to hear it. Right? It's a very powerful thing. They're never in a million years going to hear it. Right? So something like that, you have to make a compromise. Right? Otherwise, they're going to say, this is what Judaism is. It's their fault. Right? Make no mistake. It's their fault that they come to this conclusion. If I can say, go blow it out your ear, it doesn't matter. I don't care what you think. I'm going to do what God wants me to do. But you have to be sensitive. And if you're not sensitive, you just took a knife and just jabbed them in the heart. Even if they're misguided. Now, I wouldn't say this about everything, but that's that's a very volatile, that's a very volatile type of thing that people use all the time. So the onus really is on the other person. I agree, definitely on the other person. But you, as an Orthodox Jew, you're the ambassador. You got to go beyond the letter of the law to make sure it never happens.
Like you mentioned earlier, the workaround for picking up the $100 bill, you can turn around, not face it, crouch down, and still pick it up. Okay, as long as you know why you're doing what you're doing, and it's clear that you're going out of your way to make certain everybody knows you're not. If they misunderstand it and want to sour a situation, that's
right.
Onus is on them.
Right.
Sometimes it's like a hot potato playing tag with people who get stuck holding it. And I find in this day and age, more and more, there are people that are functioning in that way needlessly rather than viewing favorably.
But what's 10 times worse is the fact that what goes on in social media. That they'll just like rip apart what someone says and they don't care, right? And they'll say whatever they want, signed anonymous, right? So I tell people, if you're gonna comment, make sure it's clear. Make sure there are no issues. Make sure someone can't say, oh, you meant this or you meant that. It's got to be clear as day, right? Because if it's not clear, people can take things out of context, And people are good at that also. You could say something, you could give I could give a 2-hour class and someone could splice it and take out one part of it for like half a minute and then rip me to shreds, but they don't hear it in context. Right? I think people do that to other people, and that's just wrong. If you're gonna quote it right. Right? Otherwise don't quote it, but you can't splice it. You can't use it for your own thing and then defame somebody.
Spin it.
And yeah, you're going to defame somebody and you missed the entire point of what the context was. Because if someone says, I didn't say it like this, I said it could be like this, could be like that, or whatever, but they didn't say it definitively, but you splice it, you murdered them. Right? You totally murdered them. And Lashon Hara is 36 transgressions every time you speak against someone. Imagine if you do it in social media. How are you ever going to get atonement for that? Finished. Millions, billions of people. It's game over. It's worse than being in the CFL. Worse. But I digress.
Well, Rabbi, you've gone a full hour and a half already. I know that I've had a couple of broadcast problems here, and I think maybe I've got an issue with my sound card, possibly, that's causing this fritz. And I apologize for that because
all right, we got covered, and we covered this Mishnah. That was my goal, and I think it sheds light on a lot of different issues that certainly people have to know about.
Well, it's valuable. We cannot put a figure on it, and I wish that people would consider supporting you more. You can always visit Rabbi Coffman, folks, on his YouTube page or on his website, orthodoxconversion.com. Let's face it, some of these rabbis work very, very hard to bring you the light of Torah, and they don't ask for it. They just don't ask for it, and they deserve the support. But more than that, they can use the encouragement too. And like this Mishnah has taught us, make for yourself a Rav. Make sure you deliberately are conscious about making for yourself a Rav, that you're selecting somebody that works with you, works for you, understands you, and is not afraid to correct you. Make for yourself a friend he's talked about today, which is really, really, really detailed. All has to do with keeping yourself in check. Very, very, very wise material. But also, he clarified to...
if I wasn't paying Dan Barwell all this money, I wouldn't be on the show. So, that's why we're so good friends.
Rabbi, you are such a blessing. We thank you all the way from Israel to shine light, and hopefully we can keep continuing these courses. But I got to get to the bottom of what's made this. You started it. I thought it was Coffman proof, but then again, too, I'm scratching through list by list. It could be software.
I think everyone should pray for Dan's soundboard. Soundboard, the son of Dan. So we should, hopefully we get this checked out for next week.
Yeah, I bought this new computer. Like I said, in July. Ordered it custom built from Dell. Spent a few $1,000. Not a cheap one. The point of the matter is, I was expecting it to be better than my last one, which I know had all solid state Intel Extreme components, and I loved it. And I was able to work with that for 10 years without issue. And this new computer, which is actually supposed to be more powerful, seems to be giving me more glitches. And perhaps it's just pilot error on my fault, but I'll get to the bottom of it. So,
we still did an hour and a half, and we're still good. So, we're still good.
You got a wedding tomorrow night. Now our usual day is Wednesday, so are we still going to aim for tentative?
Next week should be good. I don't see why, but whatever. If there's an issue, I'll let you know. But it should be fine.
Hashem willing. So until then, folks, we're going to let you go. It was a wonderful class, and I thank you, Rabbi Coffman, for sharing with us once again. So, folks, until next week, have a wonderful, wonderful week.